Have you ever worked hard, stayed honest, done everything right, and still felt that your life remained painfully small? Have you ever noticed that some people do not fail because they lack talent, but because they shrink their future before it even begins? Many men never build the life they want, not because the world is cruel, but because their thinking becomes a cage. They measure tomorrow with today's fear, today's hunger, today's disappointment, and then wonder why nothing truly changes. They pray for a bigger harvest while planting tiny plans, and they ask life for safety instead of possibility. Over time, small thinking starts to look like wisdom, even though it quietly steals courage, growth, and joy. But every once in a while, one moment breaks that pattern, and a man finally sees himself clearly. This story is about such a man, and about the day he learned that bigger thinking changes everything. Stay with this story, because its lesson may show you why your hands work hard, but your life stays narrow. In a small medieval village at the edge of a deep northern forest, smoke hung low in cold air. The houses were built from dark timber, the church bell carried far, and winters bit hard. There lived Stefan, a 37-year-old woodcutter known for strength, fairness, and dependable work. He delivered firewood on time, charged honest prices, and helped widows stack wood before the snow. No one called him greedy, and no one doubted his willingness to labor. Still, labor alone had not brought him peace. Stefan was always one hard month away from trouble, one broken tool away from panic. He dreamed of owning a timber yard, hiring men, and crafting beams for houses and mills. Yet each morning he chose the same narrow path he had chosen for years. Stefan cut whatever sold fastest. He felled young trees for quick firewood, stripped good saplings for charcoal, and rarely waited for timber to mature. He told himself people needed fuel now, and now was where the money was. If anyone spoke of managing woodland for larger timber, he dismissed it as rich men's planning. "A hungry man cannot wait 20 years for an oak," he would say. The sentence sounded reasonable enough to end most conversations. But beneath it lived a deeper belief. My life will always belong to urgency. Years ago, Stefan had worked under a cruel landowner who cared only for immediate profit. Entire groves were stripped bare in 2 seasons, leaving stumps, mud, and emptiness behind. Stefan learned from that world that the fastest cut was the smartest cut. He never questioned whether survival habits from desperate years had become permanent rules in calmer ones. So every winter he sold wood. Every spring he entered the forest again. And every year the good stands grew thinner, farther away, and harder to replace. What looked like steady work was actually slow depletion. His arms grew stronger while his future grew weaker. One bitter January, snow came early and stayed deep. Villagers needed twice the usual firewood, and Stefan worked like a man chased by wolves. He cut young ash and beech near the eastern ridge because mature timber was too far under heavy snow. The coins came quickly, and for a few weeks he felt almost successful. Then thaw arrived, and the hillside he had overcut turned soft and unstable. Rain followed. The loosened slope slid downward and crushed part of a goat pen below. No one died, but the damage shook the village. The reeve inspected the slope and frowned at the fresh stumps standing like broken teeth. "You have been taking wood as though the forest renews itself overnight," he told Stefan. Stefan said little, but shame burned hotter than the forge. The next month, a builder from another valley passed through, seeking seasoned beams for a new granary. Stefan could not supply them. He had almost no mature timber left to offer. The builder took his business elsewhere, and Stefan watched a large chance leave with the wagon tracks. It was not laziness that cost him. It was the habit of cutting too small, too early, too quickly. That evening, he sat outside his cottage sharpening an axe that had built him no real security. For the first time, the tool felt less like a livelihood and more like a confession. Several days later, Stefan was sent to deliver split logs to old Marta, the village forester's widow. Her cottage stood near the edge of the oldest part of the woods, where the air smelled of moss. Marta was bent with age, but her voice still had the firmness of someone not easily fooled. While Stefan stacked her wood, she watched him with the kind of silence that sees too much. At last, she asked, "Do you know why this part of the forest still stands?" Stefan shrugged. "Because fewer men cut here, I suppose." Marta shook her head and pointed to a massive chestnut tree nearby. Its trunk was broad enough that 3 men together could barely circle it. Beneath it, spiked burrs had fallen open, revealing smooth brown seeds inside. Marta picked up one chestnut and placed it in Stefan's palm. "What is this worth today?" she asked. Stefan glanced at it. "Very little. A pig might eat it." Marta nodded and tapped the giant trunk with her stick. "And what is this worth?" Stefan looked up through the branches, where winter light broke against a web of limbs. "More than I could afford," he admitted. "Timber, shade, nuts, shelter, strong wood for generations." Marta's eyes stayed on him. "Then why do men keep treating seeds like scraps?" Stefan had no answer that did not accuse him. She bent slowly, gathered 3 more chestnuts, and held them out. "A foolish man burns saplings and sells seedlings because he only thinks in cold nights. A wise man protects growth because he thinks in winters he has not reached yet." Stefan stared at the chestnuts in his hand, suddenly aware of how his whole trade had been shaped. Marta continued, "The forest does not reward greed, but neither does it reward fear. It rewards stewardship. It rewards those who can wait without wasting." Then she said the sentence Stefan would remember for the rest of his life. "Any man can cut a tree, but it takes a larger mind to grow one." Stefan walked home through the silent woods with snow melting off the branches above him. He kept opening his hand and staring at the chestnuts as though they might accuse him aloud. By the time he reached his cottage, he knew something had shifted. He was tired of earning in circles. He was tired of solving today's need by thinning tomorrow's supply. He was tired of treating his life like a winter that never ended. That night, he spread charcoal on a plank and drew the 4 sections he knew best. He marked the overcut places, the neglected patches, the wetter ground, the stronger slopes. He saw, perhaps for the first time, not a place to harvest, but a system to manage. Before dawn, he buried 2 chestnuts in a pot outside his door and kept one on the shelf above his bed. Then he went to the reeve with a request that surprised them both. He asked to lease the neglected western grove for long-term management instead of quick cutting rights. The reeve narrowed his eyes. "Since when do you think in years?" Stefan answered, "Since I learned that cutting everything fast leaves a man nothing large enough to build with." The reeve hesitated, then agreed to modest terms because no one else wanted the burden. Stefan signed with a hand that shook only once. The change did not turn his life easy overnight. In fact, for a while, thinking bigger made his days harder. He still needed to sell firewood, but now he cut selectively, preserving strong young growth. He walked farther for mature timber and earned slower money from better wood. He fenced off parts of the western grove to protect new growth from grazing animals. He planted chestnut, ash, and oak where the ground allowed, and alder near the wetter stretch. He learned which saplings needed spacing and which species strengthened soil for what would come later. He began seasoning timber properly under cover instead of rushing half-cured wood to market. Villagers mocked him at first. "Stefan has become a gardener with an axe," one man joked outside the tavern. Stefan let them laugh, because mockery bothers a man less once he sees farther than his critics. He repaired his shed and built raised racks for drying planks. He kept records of what he cut, what he planted, and what each section needed next. These were not grand gestures. They were disciplined acts under a larger design. The chestnut on his table became a symbol he looked at each morning before work. It reminded him that value often begins long before profit can be counted. By spring, small changes were visible. The western grove no longer looked stripped and careless. It looked intentional. New saplings took root. Cut areas were cleaner. Seasoned stacks stayed dry through the rain. Stefan also changed how he spoke. He stopped saying, "I just sell firewood." Instead, he began saying, "I am building timber worth using." Words matter because they reveal the size of the frame around a person's work. In summer, a cartwright from the next valley stopped to inspect Stefan's drying ash. He knocked on the boards, tested the grain, and raised his brows with quiet approval. "This is better than what I usually find around here," he said. Stefan named a fair price without shrinking from embarrassment. The cartwright bought the stack and asked whether more could be ready by autumn. That single order did not make Stefan wealthy, but it changed something more important. It proved that longer thinking could create stronger value. Encouraged, Stefan built a second covered rack and hired a boy named Emil to help with hauling. He taught Emil how to spot straight growth, how to leave healthy saplings, and how to plant after cutting. "We do not rob the forest," Stefan told him. "We work with what we want it to become." Those words would have sounded strange coming from the old Stefan. Now they felt like the simple truth. Over the next 2 years, his firewood business became smaller in volume but stronger in quality. His timber business grew quietly, beam by beam, order by order. He sold seasoned oak for doors, ash for carts, and chestnut poles for fences that lasted longer. He planted every spring, thinned carefully every fall, and let time begin working beside him instead of against him. The western grove thickened, the soil held, birds returned. More importantly, Stefan no longer felt haunted by every season. He was still a working man, still tired at night, still marked by weather. But his labor had finally become cumulative. By spring, Stefan had repaired his cottage, expanded his yard, and paid off old tool debts. More than that, he had gained the quiet respect reserved for men whose foresight becomes visible. Villagers no longer saw him merely as a woodcutter. They saw a man who had learned to think beyond winter. Sometimes, Stefan would walk the western grove at dusk when the wind moved softly through the young trees. He would pause beside the oldest chestnut there and remember Marta's words. "Any man can cut a tree. It takes a larger mind to grow one." He understood now that the lesson reached beyond forests. A person can spend years burning tomorrow in small pieces without realizing it. Quick comfort, quick money, quick approval, quick relief, quick decisions that thin out what could have matured. That is why thinking big matters so much. It does not mean arrogance. It does not mean pretending patience is easy. It means making choices that honor what can become strong if given time, structure, and protection. Stefan's life changed because he stopped measuring every decision by the nearest cold night. He began measuring it by the kind of life he wanted to stand inside years later. That is a lesson people still need. Maybe your seed is a skill you keep postponing. Maybe it is a habit that feels small now but could grow into stability. Maybe it is the courage to stop trading long-term strength for short-term relief. Thinking big is often less dramatic than people imagine. Often it looks like restraint, stewardship, and a stronger standard repeated over time. Often it begins the day you stop saying, "This is all I can do," and start asking, "What could grow here if I finally built with the future in mind?" So if this story gave you something to think about, keep that thought near your next decision. And if you enjoy stories like this, a like, subscription, or share helps this kind of work reach others. Because sometimes one protected seed or one uncut sapling becomes the beginning of an entirely different life.